Hello guys, and welcome to the Lean with Plants podcast. I'm Chelsea, former overweight, healthy vegan, confused about why I couldn't look like my favorite plant-based influencers even though I was chugging back green smoothies every day. After a decade of unsustainable vegan diets, I learned the truth about weight loss, lost 40 pounds, and now I'm in the best shape of my life even after 2 kids. Girl, if you've been struggling to drop the pounds as a vegan, stuck in a cycle of self-sabotage, sick of yo-yo dieting and going hungry, never being able to get and stay lean, then this is the podcast for you. Each week I share the no BS truth about why vegan women are overweight, the action steps to get you shedding fat, and the mindset you'll need to get slim for life. I'm stoked to have you here. Let's get started. Hello, beautiful. I hope that you're having a fantastic day. I'm excited to hang out with you again, whether you are sitting in the car right now or you're playing with your kids or you're walking a dog or a cat or whatever else. I hope that your day is going fantastically. We are going to carry on this conversation about can anyone get lean, and examining set point theory in particular, which is the theory that your body is really fighting weight loss and weight gain, and that it wants to regulate a certain weight. So if you have not listened to part 1 of the series, then go and listen to that right now. It's really, really important that you understand that before you come into this episode. And in that episode, just to give you a bit of a recap, we talked about set point, your body defending that, like I said, and then also settling point, which is a theory that it's not so much about your body defending a certain weight and that's the reason that we maintain or tend to maintain our weight, and that it's purely based on environmental factors. So if you're in a stable environment, your weight will stay stable. If that environment changes so that you've got more calories coming in, then you will gain weight. Same as if you lose weight. So in this episode, we're going to go past those 2 theories and we're going to talk about 2 other theories. Okay. And this is the general intake model of regulation and the dual intervention point model. These theories, I think, are much more in depth, and they're going to show to you why it's possibly difficult to shift fat, and then also why some people tend to gain more weight than others, even in the same kind of setting. I'm sure you know someone who is super skinny eating a ton of food, and we're going to look at why that is. We're going to talk about some things that you can do to get leaner and what kind of influence you have, and then also what kind of part genetics play in the weight that you kind of naturally settle at. So my hope is that this episode is going to give you understanding and also some practical tools to decide what works for you as an individual, and to not compare yourself or your journey with anyone else. And then also, obviously, I think it's important to understand how these kind of things work, because there is so much that is bombarded, we get bombed by, I don't know, we get bombarded by a lot of crap out there. And I really think that the more you understand how this works, then the more you're going to be able to apply it in your life, and the more you're not going to be swayed by just clever marketing, even if it is not true or pseudoscience. So this general intake model of regulation, this model takes elements from the settling point and the set point theory. So if you remember, set point was your body is almost like a thermostat. It's defending a certain weight, and once you go above or below that, it's kind of like the thermostat turns on and it revs things up to get you back to that weight, or it cools things down to get you back to that weight. And then the settling point theory, where this is just about your environment and your intake, and that's going to govern where you end up. So this intake model of regulation, it takes both of these things into account. It tries to explain how your energy intake, so your calories coming in, are regulated by every factor. So your environment and your physiological and your psychological, your social, all of these factors that contribute to really how much you intake in terms of calories. So remember, settling point, how calories coming in, they're mostly unregulated. You don't have a system that kind of switches that off or fights it. It's just about environment. So that would determine how many calories you ate. And then the set point theory, calories coming in, they're regulated mostly by leptin levels. Think about that thermostat again. Leptin levels go up or down. That would cause you to have more or less hunger, which would result in you eating more. So that's more of an internal regulation of how many calories you consume. So this combines these two factors and they're divided into two parts. So you've got these physiological intake regulations, and that would be things like your hunger levels, leptin levels, individual metabolism. It would also include like your energy expenditure factored in there in the physiological regulation of your intake. So if you, for example, are a bigger person, your energy expenditure is going to be more, obviously. Big car needs more fuel than a small car. So that's a physiological in your body factor that would influence how much you intake. Because if you're bigger, you're going to be obviously taking in more. Or maybe not obviously, but to maintain that, you would be needing to take in more, right? So that would affect how many calories you need. So that's the first factor, okay? That physiological factor. And then the second factor that changes energy intake is your environment. So how your environment changes how many calories you consume. So if you think about the difference between like a small rural town in China in the 50s versus any Western country now with the food environment that we currently have, these are both environmental factors that are vastly, vastly different. So you're going to have a very different weight result from just the fact that in one instance, rural China in the 50s, you're probably barely getting enough food to survive in some places. And then now in Western countries, most of us are getting way, way more calories than we need because there is so many calories entering the food chain through processed food. So you've got these two factors, this physiological factor that's influencing how much you eat in terms of how many calories, and then you've also got these environmental factors that are going to affect how many calories you eat. So think of it a bit like this. If you're sitting down to a buffet of pizza, you've got two main factors that are going to influence how many calories you eat at the buffet. So your environmental factors, pizza being super, super available, the type of food that is there, how many calories are in each slice, that's going to affect it. That's an environmental affection. Oh my gosh, guys, what the heck is wrong with me? It's an environmental factor. I'm trying to combine affect, and factor. And I think I've come up with a new word, which is a factor. A factoring in. So how many calories in each slice, that's obviously going to change how many calories you eat, right? So whether that was like a meat lovers or a vegetarian, they're going to have different calorie density. So even in one slice of pizza, the environmental impact of that is going to be different in your body. What kind of people you're with, right? If you're with big eaters. Oh, heck. Okay. If you're with big eaters or you're with small eaters, that's an environmental factor that is probably going to influence how much you eat. These are all of these kind of things I've described are environmental factors. And then you also have these physiological factors, and that could be things like hunger, right? Which would be influenced by like stretch receptors in your stomach and leptin levels, and whether you have a faster or a slower metabolism. Like, think about this. This is probably to a lesser degree than what you think. And then even genetic preferences like taste might affect intake, right? Like if you don't really like the taste of pizza, and that's just a brain chemistry thing, and that's a genetic physiological phenomenon, like who doesn't like the taste of pizza, that's going to affect your intake. So what I'm trying to get at here is you've got so many things that really affect intake. If you look at the if you look at the set point theory, pretty much intake has just changed by your physiological factors. You can see, and even in a simple example like this, that's obviously not true. So already this theory is starting to explain things better than both the settling point theory and the set point theory. So these environmental factors are called uncompensated factors. So they're purely regulated by the environment. There's no feedback loop there for how they affect intake. Infect it. Oh my gosh. And then the physiological factors are called compensated factors because they work on a feedback loop within your body that affects how much you consume. So in this model, you've basically got the hypothesis that net intake is the sum of all of these factors and what it will determine, and that's going to determine where your weight settles. So when the environmental factors change to increase calories, you're going to see an initial rise in body weight, and then it's actually going to settle lower than predictive than just a passive system, like settling point, because of these compensated factors. So overall, I think this is a much better model for explaining intake regulation. Like I said, it combines both of these things, these physiological feedback loops and environmental factors. And when tested in a computer model, it does match actual data pretty accurately. The weakness of this model is that it kind of absorbs energy expenditure, so calories that you burn, as a compensated factor for your intake. So it's not looking at them being a factor in and of themselves. It's looking at that they're directly related to how many calories you're consuming. So this brings us to the last theory, and this is the dual intervention point model. And this theory is a hybrid of the set point theory and the settling point theory, where you have an upper and lower limit of weight, and that's going to be where those limits fall is going to be controlled by physiological mechanisms, so factors within your body. And then within those 2 points, what regulates your weight within them is environmental factors. And that is what will be driving your weight up or down between those 2 points. So rather than having a set point, you have an upper body fat percentage or upper weight that your body is going to defend as the limit to weight gain through these physiological processes. And people who are trying to bulk and like really eat a lot of food to kind of bulk up for a competition. Not many of us in this category that we'd ever, unfortunately, be doing this. I would love to be eating just even more than I felt like I wanted to eat. No, not really. But what a lot of people will find is in that they actually reach a point where they really, really don't want to be eating anymore. Like they will struggle to eat so much, and hunger goes down. You are probably going to be like moving a whole lot more. So you've got these physiological processes which are going to make it harder to gain weight above a certain limit. And then you also have, in this theory, a lower limit. And that's also going to defend against losing more weight than what this lower limit is kind of set at. So the way that I like to look at this is to think about going to a beach and seeing 2 flags to swim between because there's a rip in the water. So you've got these surf lifeguards, and they know where the rip is, and then they've set up the flags so that people can swim safely, and then you're encouraged to swim between the flags. So once you're out there swimming, you can go wherever you want within the flags, right? Wherever you want in there is going to be determined by you and what you're up to, and you can swim around and have fun, do whatever you want. And then once you drift outside of that, imagine that the lifeguards come along on his little jet ski, picks you up and brings you back between the flags. So obviously this is a super simplistic illustration of how I understand this to work in theory. And it's easy to look at this and think, well, isn't this just a set point theory with two boundaries that it operates within? But it's not, because there's no set point that your body is actually trying to defend. It's more like you have these really strong physiological forces that keep you from going above or below certain body weights. They're not going to 100% prevent you. Obviously, we know that people can starve to death, right? But from a survival standpoint, you can see how it would make sense to have these upper and lower levels that your body is trying to defend, and that gets stronger and stronger and stronger, because that's going to prevent starvation for the most part. And it's also it's going to make it so that you are going to be able to escape from danger if you become too large. So there's no defined boundary between these points, and it's going to vary significantly, or it could vary significantly between individuals in this theory. It's largely set by genetics, but again, we don't actually know what influences this, and some of it could be influenced by environment. So this theory can help to explain why some people can defend against weight gain, even in a super hyper caloric environment. And you probably know people like this. They eat similar kind of things and they just don't gain weight. So this model explains a lot of the aspects of the obesity epidemic much better than these other models can, because it's including these environmental and genetic and physiological factors, and they're all combined in the same model. So here's a really interesting thing. So right about now you're thinking, okay, so it's really, really hard for me to lose weight. Maybe it's because I have got like an upper limit, right? And someone else's, they can eat way, way more than me, and that's the reason. But this gap between the lower and the upper limit that can vary between individuals, within that gap, the environment is what holds the most sway over what kind of weight you are at. So even someone who has a much higher body weight as the upper intervention point, they'd still only gain weight if the environmental factors allowed it. If the environmental factors were pushing them up higher and higher and higher within that, that's the only time that they're going to gain weight. So between two individuals, you could have someone who had the capacity to gain much, much more weight than someone else, and that person still be leaner than that other person because they controlled for their environmental factors. So this model explains the rising weights of individuals in our societies because of this increased calorie surplus that is entering the food chain, and it also explains why not everyone will gain weight even in the same environment. So I want you to remember that all of these models are theories. They're attempting to explain what we know to be true, and that is that you have people defending their weight relatively well, and then you also have weight gain, and that we've seen an increase in weight gain for most people throughout the past 50, 60 years. Weight gain is a huge problem in our society, and getting and staying in a healthy weight range is incredibly difficult for people. So I want you to take this all with a grain of salt. Don't put too much stock into any one of these theories. I believe that this is the one that explains things the best, and I think most people would be agreeing with that. I think set point theory in particular, if you're hearing people talking about set point theory, I think that's quite a simplistic and really outdated theory of looking at how weight loss and weight maintenance works. Obviously, it only takes into account a very, very small factor of what's happening in your body. So you can tell, set point theory is out. Settling point theory, much, much too simplistic as well. And so either of these two theories seem to hold a lot more weight, and obviously this one takes more variations in there. So if anyone ever says to you, you need to change your set point, or you can't lose weight because your set point is too high, just say, well, what about the dual intervention point model? Don't you think that better explains the fluctuations in different people's weights? I'm sure you will get a rise out of people and you will stump a lot of people if you say that. And I'm not going to go into what causes all these kind of variations between individuals because honestly, most of it is not really known. People are debating this. People are trying to study this. If they knew the answer to it, then maybe there would be a cure. But even just think about how many other physiological factors influence energy balance. And I hope that this is something that you take away from this, that metabolism is only a very, very small part of this. So hunger is a huge one. You might genetically be a hungrier person or more of a foodie or get more of a dopamine hit from certain foods, which would contribute to you eating more calories than someone who is born without a sense of smell or taste. So while there are so many genetic factors that are going to influence energy intake and energy expenditure, I kind of think when it comes to looking at whether that is your metabolism or not, most of them influence it in how they influence your behavior. And you have the opportunity to almost hack the system and make it work for you simply by what you choose to eat. So there's a lot that goes into this, and there's a ton of debate over what actually causes these kind of variations. But I think the biggest takeaway for me is this. You get to choose to focus on things within your control or to focus on things that are outside of your control. And when it comes to your body, you don't even know how many internal factors are going to affect your behavior and your weight gain or your loss, but in a way, it's not really your battle to pick. So in this model, your environment, so factors that are within your control, what you eat, how much you eat, who you have around you, what goes into your cupboard, all of that kind of thing, whether you walk to work or whether you bike or whether you go in the car. Those factors are mostly influenced by your choices. They are going to have the most influence within those ranges of what your calories in and your calories out. So you get to design that in a way that brings you to your goals regardless of your genes. And I know a lot of you are probably thinking about, what about that lower limit? What if my lower limit is set higher? So we all obviously have a lower limit that our body is going to fight to defend, right? That if we get lower than that, we're starting to eat away at muscle. We're really starting to starve and be on that path towards death. Not a good thing to do. It's obviously that you can go below that point that your body is defending. Like there's obviously only so much in terms of physiological things that your body can defend against starvation. Like you see it, people die from starvation. So if you're thinking, oh, well, I can't lose weight, there's no way I can lose weight because I've got a lower set point. That is obviously not true. You could lose weight. The question is, what is it going to take? And what does that look like for you? Well, how much influence do you have over that? You probably have more than you think. So I've done a podcast on metabolic adaptation and whether starvation mode exists. It doesn't, spoiler alert, and I want you to think of this fight that you have to defend that lower, to defend against losing too much weight, of factors that influence your behavior when getting to a super low body weight. And I believe that defense is going to be something that, like, obviously everyone is going to have that. Everyone has got that lower limit. I don't think that's set way, way, way higher for most people. And you start to see this come into play a lot more when people get to, say, below 20% in body fat. So between 20 and 18% body fat, for a lot of people, like that's super hard. It's super hard to get that low. But then if you go try and get below 18%, let's say you want to be like 16% body fat or 14 or 15% body fat, which a lot of people who compete are at that really, really low body fat, women, because you've got visible abs at that point. Most people are not going to have visible abs until they're at least 18% body fat or lower. Some people have it at higher. I know that Cassie did a test recently and she was about 20% body fat, and she's definitely got a little bit of abs showing there. So that's going to depend a little bit on your genetics as well, where you actually store most of your fat. But after that point, it does get very, very hard to get to a lower body fat percentage, because you start to get much, much, much hungrier. You can get very lethargic. And you'll see a lot of people who get to those low body weights, they actually say, like, I don't maintain this year round because it's just too hard to do. There's too many things on a physiological level that even if you're eating a super low calorie diet, they're fighting against that. So when I talk about factors that are going to influence your behavior, think about how this is going to be affecting how much weight you can lose, all right? So you're lethargic, if you're extremely hungry, if you're hardly moving, these are going to be huge factors that influence you moving less and eating more. And so that's most likely going to bring your body weight back up. So anytime that these things are like super, super strong, it's going to be hard to maintain the lifestyle with those things in place. This is really interesting though, because you can have lethargy, extreme hunger, you can be low on energy and hardly moving when you're nowhere near that lower limit. You can have that at 40 pounds overweight, depending on the kind of foods that you're eating. So keep that in mind as well. These are not necessarily always indicators that you are at your limit. They're just physiological responses to some kind of something that is happening in your body. And if you're feeling these and you're nowhere near your goal weight and you have a lot of weight still left to lose, I'm going to suggest that's much more about the food that you're choosing to eat than it is about being anywhere near a lower body weight limit. Another thing I want you to think about is that when it comes to that kind of lower limit that your body is going to defend, you don't actually really know how close you are to that line. And so like I've said, I've given you some numbers here. So 18% body fat, you wouldn't really want to be struggling much more below that number, all right? But before you get to that point, think about all these things that are going to be affecting, just these environmental factors that are going to be affecting where your weight settles. So I want to tell you the story about myself when I quit my job and I was working at a cafe, and this is when I went full-time in Lean with Plants, and I was moving so much in that job. I was probably walking like 7 kilometers a day, just on my feet the entire day, barely had a break, wasn't sitting down at all, moving, lifting heavy things, doing dishes, like lots of movement to my arms, like just a lot of movement. And then I wasn't eating much at all either, because I had a small breakfast break. I'd eat a little bit in my breakfast break, and then oftentimes when it came to my lunch break, I just felt quite stressed, so I didn't really want to eat a large lunch, and then I would be heading off to the gym, so I just wasn't eating as much. So you've got these two factors there, moving a whole lot more, hundreds of calories more than what I'm moving now, and probably eating hundreds of calories less. I would also bike to work a lot of the time. So you've got a ton of things influencing the fact that my calorie burn when I was working at the cafe was going to be a lot higher, and my calories coming in were going to be lower. So when I left that job, I gained about 4 kilos, and try as I might, I have not really gotten them off. And I believe that it's possible for me to get those 4 kilos off if I really want to. But because my environment has changed, that has now become so much more difficult. Does this mean that I have got a new kind of lower level, that it's so hard for me to go below that and get back to where I was because a level has changed? No. It just means that my environment has changed. So now my environmental factors are in and of themselves defending that point, because I eat as much food as I want to eat, right? I don't restrict my calories at all. So I'm eating about the same every single day, and my lifestyle is pretty much the same. I'm not making any big changes in it. I already eat a ton of veg. I already eat like a lot of low calorie foods. I'm already like really super consistent. I don't drink alcohol. So it's not like I can make huge changes without that being really difficult for me, without probably going hungry. So I don't make huge changes in that. And my movement is way, way less now that I'm sitting here doing a podcast for you, which is fantastic. And I'm getting to work full time in my passion and see people's lives transformed every single day in Lean with Plants. But my calorie burn is way, way less. So for me to then change that, I would have to drastically change my lifestyle, right? Like I'd need to be walking more. For me to get back to that same level of movement of where I sat when I was 4 kilos lighter is going to be significantly hard. And I don't really think it's worth it for me. I would like to be leaner. Sure, I loved being 4 kilos leaner than I am now. I thought I looked fantastic. I love seeing a bit more ab definition. But realistically, my lifestyle doesn't support me being at such a low body weight now, currently. It would be more of a fight that I'm willing to take to be there. So I wanted to point this out to you because when we're looking at like how much does the environment and how much does genetics affect this, you honestly can't really know. All you can do is focus on things that you can control. And I just want to encourage you, especially for people who are they're towards the last few pounds and they're just trying to get a little bit off. What in your environment can you still change? And focus on the habit changes that are going to lead you to that result, really wherever you are. Because that's ultimately going to be determining, those environmental factors like your habits are going to be determining where you end up. And then from there, you can tweak and change if you want to, but you get to keep asking that question, is it worth it for you? And for me at this point, even though I want to be a little bit leaner, it is not worth it for me to change my lifestyle more than I have. And maybe I will at some point. Maybe at some point I'll develop a 20,000 step routine per day. At the moment, I can't be stuffed. And Dr. Doug Lisle, he's very much a behavioral scientist. So automatically, behavioral scientists much, much more likely to choose the settling point model because it is environmental, right? It's all about environmental factors. So he has a saying that any kind of plateau is a behavioral equilibrium. I don't think it's just behavior. After looking into this more, I think there's more at play here. And we don't really know how much influences that. But if you look at my story, in that instance, you see that environment is playing the biggest role as to whether I am what weight I am right now, which I'm super happy with, or what weight that I was, which I would probably be more happy with. That is an environmental change. That is not something that has happened in my genetics. And I didn't know that I could get to that low weight. I didn't know that that was possible for me. But I also had never been in an environment like that. So a lot of this is going to come down to what you believe about predetermined, not predetermined outcomes, or whether you are the one that has the biggest influence over your own life. You guys probably guessed, like, I'm going to lean heavily towards that. I believe that to be true, that you have a big influence over your fate, or at least choosing how you respond to the hand that you have been dealt. You get to decide that, and you get to decide to do the best that you can. And I wanted to share a little study with you because this whole conversation was started on this idea that people say weight loss is impossible, or diets don't work, or you're always going to go back to whatever weight it was that you started. So we've looked at all these things. We know that that is not true. When you look at the data, there are reasons for defending a certain body weight, and it's complex. But this study, I think, is really hopeful because it flies in the face of this idea that diets can never work. The broad study was a 12-week study that was done with overweight individuals who are randomized into two groups. On one hand, you've got standardized medical care, and then the other group, you've got bi-weekly training on how to implement a low-fat, whole foods, plant-based diet into their lifestyle. So you got no meals provided. There was no increase in activity or exercise, just focus on eating plants. No fixed portion sizes, eat as much as you want. It's not even an intentional weight loss intervention, right? So this whole foods plant-based group, they actually lost an average of 19 pounds, at the end of this 3 months that they were having this bi-weekly training. And this is compared to the control group, and they didn't really lose any. Statistically, nothing. And so this study was dismissed, and people went about their lives. They didn't come to the training anymore. 3 months was up. Here's where it gets really, really crazy. So the researchers were curious to see how much weight the group had gained back at the 6-month mark. Do you remember in the last episode, I talk about how notoriously bad or hard it is for people to maintain their weight loss, that oftentimes the success of a weight loss product is measured by how much weight they gain back. So whether they gain back all the weight or they don't but gain back quite as much, or whether they don't gain as much weight as a control group. That's the success, right? That's the measure that you have to beat. Instead of having gained any weight back, that plant-based group was down a whopping total of 27 pounds. So they'd kept losing. After those 3 months were up, they'd kept losing at the 6-month mark. And this is just insanely crazy. Most studies that last a year, so even initial weight loss is going to creep up. These are like intervention studies, right? They last an entire year. But in the broad study, even a year later, these participants had kept the weight off. They had greater weight loss than any comparable trial where calorie intake or exercise wasn't limited that has ever been recorded in medical literature. This is a record-breaking study. And to anyone who says that weight loss is impossible, or long-term weight loss doesn't happen, that diets don't work, that lifestyle change isn't possible because your body is defending a predetermined weight, this proves that, at least in some cases, this does not need to be true. So what do we do with this information? We know that it is notoriously hard to keep weight off. And we know that environmental factors play a huge role. We know that there are genetic factors that play a role as well. What do you get to do about it? Well, I want to suggest that the most important thing for you to focus on is habits that lead to you disrupting the energy balance in your environment. So what I mean by that is eating a ton of vegetables, making that a habit, not only in how you cook, but also how you snack, how you live your life, how you do your weekends. Just making vegetables a big part of how you do your lifestyle is going to lower your calories. And this is the biggest and easiest thing that you can do. Obviously, focusing on consistency is another huge thing. Developing consistency habits. And if you're struggling with that, the best place that you can learn that is the Lean Off Plants program that I have created. It makes me sound like a total ass to say that, but prioritizing consistency and doing what it takes to get consistent. I've done a lot of podcast episodes on changing your habits and changing your mindset around what you consider progress and ditching perfectionism. And these are all things that are going to increase your consistency. There was a member that we had in Lean Off Plants this week, and if you're listening, this is your shout out, girl. And she has been frustrated and struggling because she has not seen significant weight loss. She hadn't really seen much weight loss since joining Lean Off Plants. She posted this week in the group and she showed her little graph, and after months of the scale staying the same, it is starting to drop. And she said, I'm finally starting to get this because I tweaked a few things in my diet. I started eating a little bit more food so that I could get consistent. And now, because I don't feel deprived, because I don't feel like I'm on a diet anymore, my consistency has gone way up and I'm starting to see results. Guys, there are so many people who feel like they are the exception. They feel like they are broken. They feel like there are things fighting them. more often than not, the thing that fights you is your own behavior. It is your own, what focusing on habits and lifestyle choices allows you to do is it allows you to feel like you are making progress even when you don't see that reflected on the scales straight away. I really want to encourage you, don't worry too much about the scale weight. See that as data. See that as a latent measure of your habits. And this is why the Lean with Plants course is so heavily focused on habit change, because we know that when you influence your habits, when you change your habits, when your behavior and your mindset changes, that is what leads to results. I hope that this episode has been helpful for you, and I have this fear that people are going to listen to this episode and they're going to be like, take one thing that I said and pull it out as a reason why they can't lose weight. And it's the opposite of what I hope to happen in this. If you take one thing away from this series, take away the fact that you have so much influence over your weight loss and that your body is so incredibly smart, that your body is so incredibly well designed. Choose to focus on those things that are within your control. Choose to focus on the habits that lead to weight loss. And when anyone tries to tell you that your body has a predetermined set point, send them away or tell them what's what. And if you're listening to this episode and you're struggling on your journey, you're wanting a community around you to support you, you're feeling alone, you're feeling like you don't know how it works, or you just can't get consistent, maybe you feel like a little bit of a failure because you've tried so many things and no matter what you know, maybe you know all this stuff and it doesn't really change it. You still don't eat the veggies. You still don't stay consistent on the weekends. Then, my friend, I think you should join Lean with Plants. I know we can get you the results that you want. I know that long-term sustainable weight loss that stays off for life is possible for you. Lean with Plants is opening on the 27th of July. So if you are wanting to be part of our amazing community, put that date in your calendar and be looking out on my Instagram. And you can also sign up for the wait list to get notified that those doors are open and ready for you to join. As always, thank you so much. And if you liked it, please consider giving me a review and sharing. It really, really helps. And I love reading all the reviews. I think we're at about 250 written reviews now, which is flippin' amazing. I can't thank you guys enough. Okay, this really is goodbye. I really need to have a drink, as you can probably tell. See ya. See you next week.